welcome back to the Scarlet Faithful podcast. I'm Aaron Brightman. Apologies for my voice today. Allergies in full bloom in New Jersey, and I've been off 50 days from the podcast, hoping my voice will be better, but cannot wait for content, and lucky to have David Anderson back today on Tuesday to recap the spring game and kind of some big picture takeaways on the current state of Rutgers football. David, to start things off, what were some of your initial thoughts in watching the Scarlet-White game on Saturday?
I guess the main thing is just that we did see real football, which I was a little apprehensive about when I saw how many guys were not playing. Most of them were dressed. So if fans saw, a lot of the guys were in their full pads, full gear, they did warm up, but they didn't necessarily play, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing to just get in that mindset, the pregame routine. But overall, the level of play was actually pretty good. Like, obviously there were some misassignments. There was plenty of things where misalignment, guys at the last minute kind of pointing, especially if they were, with other players who they hadn't been with much. But I was very pleased, and I felt like it was very entertaining for those that either had to watch it 3 times on the replay or actually were hopefully there in person.
Yeah, it was I agree. I was a little surprised how many people were held out, but it was also a great opportunity and kind of a reward for a lot of the younger players that have been working really hard in spring camp to kind of showcase and get real reps in front of fans. So that was certainly telling. Let's jump into quarterback. Athan Kaliakmanis versus Gavin Wimsatt. Both played the first half. Both had a lot of action. Just in your initial thoughts on how both looked on Saturday.
Well, I think that there was not that big of a gap overall, but really, and I'll summarize it the most concise way I can. At the end of the day, you're trying to find the guy who can obviously run the offense efficiently, like Noah Vedral did, but what you really want is which quarterback can make the defense have to defend the most grass, the most turf, the most field area. And so the big kind of trade-off at the moment that we're looking at is Athan Kaliakmanis completed a couple deep balls. Gavin Wimsatt didn't. And even the announcers commented that Gavin almost hit on those balls. Well, he's been almost hitting on them for 3 years. And that was the only time in the broadcast where I was kind of like mad, because I was like, really, there's a lot of positive things to say, really. And then you see even a Johnny Shepard come in the second half, and he's throwing to the same receivers, and like a couple were dropped or there was a penalty, but he was throwing the ball accurately on those plays, whereas Gavin is not. So that said, I think point, Athan, if we're scoring at home for that, because he dropped a couple in the bucket that were nice. But then for Wimsatt, he was just firing those balls, especially if a slot receiver was running an out route. Whereas Kaliakmanis, we saw this, we talked about this from the very beginning of when we first started talking about the possibility of him coming to Rutgers, and then subsequently when he committed. He just doesn't have a lot of juice on those balls. And the very first throw he had that should have been intercepted by Crumpler, who we'll talk more about later, was just not the only time. Like, it just seems like the balls die, like dying quails when they're going out on those routes. So I don't know if there's anything you can do mechanically to fix that, because it seems like he can throw the deep ball fine. But really, Gavin was just killing the opponent with those type of routes, just either tight end or more, not as much tight end, but normally that slot receiver out. He was just peppering that to Nasir Montgomery, who had a nice game, who I had mentioned in a previous podcast. I thought he did a good job. But then in the run game, I think Gavin was being a little bit more, let's just say, liberal with the rules of the game, because plenty of times he either should have been taken down and he kept running. And to his credit, I was thinking about this when I was watching it one of the times. Sometimes as a starting quarterback, that goes a long way, especially for our listeners that have been watching the NBA playoffs. So last night was Lakers Nuggets, and after the Nuggets scored to take the lead, LeBron James took the inbounds pass and bumped into Nikola Jokic. If that was anyone other than Jokic, it might have been a foul. But because he has the star power, Wimsatt has at least played a year and a half. He's got a reputation. I think he gets away with a little bit more, not only in the spring game, but he might in the fall as well. So I was happy, though, to see that Wimsatt, he just felt like he belonged a little bit more than he did in the past. He just was more decisive with his throws, with his running when he decided to take it and run, just in terms of getting the offense moving. So I was pleasantly surprised to see that. Though Kaliakmanis, it just felt like he was a little bit more relaxed. It felt like the White team, which he was quarterbacking, was a little bit more relaxed. So, and the one other main thing I'll say was about, I felt like the White team really struggled to block outside pass rush. And if this was actually a game, I don't obviously think that Taj White and Dominic Rivera would have been the ones protecting the tackle spots for Kaliakmanis, but it's hard to get a read because there was just some pressure coming outside that he had no chance to react to. Whereas Gavin, I felt Mozo Williams did a much better job protecting him for the most part, playing left tackle for the red team. And then he did have Tyler Needham, who's a presumed starter, or at least in the battle at right tackle. So I felt like Gavin definitely had a slight advantage there. But for the most part, I don't think there was that much of a gap between the two passers. But I did see both of them played better than I thought they would, I guess. I don't feel that either Athan Kaliakmanis or Gavin Wimsatt would majorly hold back the team like the quarterback play has the last 2 years, basically. I feel much better about it overall, even to the point that, I mean, one of the things that maybe almost made Gavin look a notch down is that Johnny Shepard came in as the backup for the red team, which I made that point because that means he was playing with basically the same offensive line, roughly the same skill position players, even though guys were roughly in and out. And Shepard he just has a feel for the game. I mean, we saw this on his one drive last year. I think he only had one drive all season, but he has good sensibilities about where to go with the ball. He just feels the pocket really, really, really naturally, and he gets the ball to where it needs to go. Almost, it seems like he has like a sixth sense. So I'm not sure if he knows the playbook as well. I'm not sure if his arm's as good as the other guys, but he just looks like he has a good feel, which almost made it seem like Gavin should have been better, I guess, once Shepard came in basically with the same crew and just looked equally, if not more comfortable behind the hood. I don't know if Rutgers has the time to develop him, or if if Gavin and Athan both stick around, if he's going to realize he has to go elsewhere. Especially because I thought AJ Serace did some nice things. Obviously, not as experienced as the other three guys. Also playing behind an offensive tackles of White that didn't protect Kaliakmanis. They really didn't protect Serace at all. He really struggled to get good protection for a while. So it'll be interesting to see with all four guys. I was listening to Mike and Richie talking on their podcast, as well as I think it was Bobby Darin on his, and I think everyone kind of had the same feeling that Athan is slightly ahead of Gavin, but it was very close, was the general consensus.
To your point, that's Mike and Richie of the Night Report. It's Bobby Darin of 24/7 Sports. And then on the Rutgers rant, Brian Fonseca and Steve Politi, Pat Lanning, they said the same thing
as well.
My thoughts were, so in terms of, you mentioned the same personnel offensively. I do think in the second half, the defensive personnel was a little bit different. And also, it's also important to note that although Johnny Shepard looked really good, it'd be interesting to see how he looks against the first team defense. I think I agree with you. His feel of the game is really strong. I think the other thing with AJ Serace, although he made some good plays, I think the fantasy that some fans have that he's the savior and going to come in this year and, change things is not true. And I think it's a good thing that Rutgers is in a position of strength, as you mentioned, with the four quarterbacks, that he's going to have time, I think, this year to grow, develop, learn the system, and not going to be forced into action the way we've seen so many Rutgers quarterbacks in the past, way too early. One thing I thought with Gavin is, you're right, mentioning, I think there's a lot of sacks that could have been occurring for both quarterbacks if, there was tackling involved. And then also Gavin on that touchdown, he probably would have been tackled at that 5 yard line. But I thought his burst, his speed looked really good, maybe even a little improved. I don't know if that maybe had to do with the defense he was going against. In terms of Kaliakmanis versus Wimsatt, I think Wimsatt still showed he struggled at some of the things he struggled at. And to your point about Kaliakmanis, I think he's an upgrade in certain areas, and I don't think he's that much significantly better in other areas, which leads me to my biggest point and question to you is that this year is going to be much different because last year Rutgers didn't really have a decision to make a quarterback. It was throw Gavin out there, let him grow, let him learn. You got to stick with him through some of the tough times and hope that it pays off in the long run, where now you have options, but your options really aren't, there's pros and cons to both, as you've mentioned. I think the most important thing now, shifting to the fall, aside from the off-season development the rest of the way, is how is Rutgers, how is Shiano, how is Shiraka going to manage the quarterback situation in the fall? Because I do think that it's likely both are going to have the opportunity to play, and it's a lot trickier because there doesn't seem to be a ton of separation. And I think it's also important to note, we're also judging it solely on one game, one practice, one scrimmage. We didn't see all the spring camp. We're not going to see all the training camp, but I think that how Rutgers manages this situation is obviously paramount to the success of the season because you can't make mistakes in terms of how you manage this situation. And it's incredibly hard to do. So I'm just curious on your thoughts based on what we know, your thoughts on how they're going to manage it and how critical that is to the success of the offense in the fall.
Yeah, so I think I'm glad I don't have to make these decisions because they're obviously not easy. In terms of how this impacts the team, I mean, kind of going back to my first, I think it was the first thing I was saying, I don't think that quarterback's going to hold this team back. However, creating a quarterback controversy is never something that you want. If I was looking at the situation, I just think that Athan Kaliakmanis at the moment sees the middle of the field a lot better than Gavin Wimsatt. When you look at the tight ends, it just felt like both Logan Blake and Kenny Fletcher, who were playing on the white team, if they were open, they were getting the ball. Whereas on the red team, it was a little bit more of a mixed bag. I think, like I said, Gavin's bread and butter is that just little out route or even a curl route that he can fire with so much velocity that the defense can't react to it even if they know it's there. But I just feel like it's going to be easier for teams to defend Gavin than it is for them to defend what Kaliakmanis brings to the table. And that's because Rutgers does have a strong run game. If they were forced to do more QB running out of necessity, then yeah, I would lean toward Gavin. But I think with Kaliakmanis, like just the fact that they're going to have to defend against those deep balls, which teams have not had to do at all against Rutgers for the last many years, is a huge factor in this. If I was playing against Gavin Wimsatt, I would run 8 men in the box all the time, and I would basically leave a single high safety and be like, if you want to throw the ball deep down the sideline, go ahead. If you want to throw, over the middle into like a zone of traffic, go ahead. We dare you. That's basically what I would do if I was facing Gavin, which is an easier thing, I think, to coach up your team, especially on a week-to-week basis. Because remember, teams aren't going to adjust their entire defense to play Rutgers, but they will make minor adjustments during the week. And I think making minor adjustments to do that would be easier to do. The only other thing I would say is you can't have your leash be too short with your quarterback either. And I'm sure we're going to talk about this ad nauseum. But you can't have it too short where guys are afraid to make a mistake, where the locker room is like half the guys are on one side, half the guys on the other. I've been in a locker room like that, and it really drives down the level of play. It's not like guys are tanking reps, but they might go a little bit harder for this guy or whatever. But I just think you got to be able to throw the ball downfield. And that, especially with another year of tape on Shiraka Rutgers offense, they're not going to be able to get away with what they got away with last year, sometimes running on 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, and somehow getting it at times. I don't think that's going to work. even though I do think Gavin looked more decisive and better with his running and pulling the ball when he was deciding. I personally think, in my limited knowledge of what we saw from their history and in one spring game, like you said, that I would think it would be a little bit, gives the offense a little bit more to have Athan Kaliakmanis as the quarterback now, slightly, but I could be convinced otherwise. I think that there might be a scenario where Gavin Wimsatt gets goal line plays, or he has another package where you keep him involved, because you'd rather have that happen than come in cold. But if you do that, you run the risk of creating a controversy. If he flashes and they're scoring a few touchdowns with him under center or in the shotgun, I guess it would be. So, I mean, what are your thoughts at this point? What do you think they're going to do?
Yeah, all good points, and that was kind of what I was getting at. Is I don't think it's an easy decision. I don't think it's a no brainer. I do agree. I think Kaliakmanis showed some touch. Nassim Brantley, it was great to see him. Get out in space and make some catches like that. And they seem to have a really good rapport in this game. And it's interesting, right? Because he is a running threat. I do think he helped Monangai at times last year with the read option and getting the ball to him, which really helped in the run game, which that's something we're not going to know about Kaliakmanis in terms of how he handles that type of play and if he's able to be as effective. So I agree, stretching the field will help the run game, but I also think a key aspect to the run game was Wimsatt, with the read option, giving it to Monangai in a position for him to succeed. So that's something to consider too. But yeah, I think Kaliakmanis right now probably looks like the more sturdy, reliable option. I was hoping that Gavin would look more reliable in short yardage, accurate passing situations. And I don't think he looked that different. So if that doesn't change, I think that's probably not to necessarily need a full justification, but I think that's the obvious justifications why you go with Kaliakmanis. And again, ideally, yeah, keeping Gavin involved, inserting him at times as a running threat who can throw. I like the goal line suggestion idea. That's really smart. It's, again, a lot of this too, and I think maybe part of why we saw so many guys held out. And let's be honest, tomorrow's May 1st. That's the transfer portal deadline, right, for fall players to enter. There's just so much that happens in terms of roster management. And, these guys are not robots, right? So it's the managing of the egos, managing of expectations. There's so much that goes into it nowadays, especially with NIL, especially with transfer portal, that it's impossible to know all that goes into that. But it's important to recognize, I think, that when we're talking about these decisions, it just complicates all of it, because you have to, it's team chemistry at the end of the day is vital to any team's success. And it's just a lot harder, I think, to achieve nowadays. So how they manage the quarterback situation, to me, is going to be fascinating to watch, and certainly a key question we're going to harp on throughout the offseason and in preseason training camp.
For sure. I mean, the last thing I would just say about quarterback is, I mean, you saw how, again, I want to take it with a grain of salt, but you saw how AJ Suresh just was putting screen and dump offs on guys, like perfect timing, right in their hands. Gavin Wimsatt was not doing that. And so, it's a red flag. On the flip side, though, the other thing you could do, and this is maybe where this is going, is because you feel more comfortable in your backups and your third and your fourth quarterback, you could turn Gavin loose like we've wanted them to do and not be worried that he's going to get hurt and you're going to take a massive step back. It may fuel his game more, like I talk about with other sports, like with a base stealer in baseball, you got to let him do it. But I also understand why they were hesitant to let him do it last year, because he just wasn't decisive. If you saw with this game the other day, he was decisive. Like, if he's going, he's going. And I think that made him look faster, which is actually something we saw from Kaliakmanis in his career. He's not a blazing athlete, but he makes a good decision on his timing and is able to scramble a little bit. So we could, and I mean, I'm sure for older fans, we may end up with a Ray Lucas, Brian Forte situation where it's like one guy is in there running all over the place, but with a strong arm, and the other guy is like the veteran who may be turnover prone, but is going to go for the big play through the air. I mean, we may basically just be having history repeat itself in that sense with a transfer from a conference foe coming in and being that role. So shades of the past, I guess, might be what we're looking at.
I like that, and I agree with you. It's going to be fascinating to watch. The one thing I would say about Gavin with running is it's a lot easier to be decisive when you know you can't be tackled. So
True.
can he be that decisive in live action? That's key, I think, for sure. Moving on to wide receiver, I think it's an exciting position. We saw a lot of young players. Nassim Brantley, like I mentioned, finally seeing him in action. KJ Duff had some moments. Ben Black, who's had a lot of talk, was not there. He was at prom. But there's just a lot of receivers. I think one note I wanted to point out was I think it's important to remember about the offense. At this time last year, nobody had Kyle Monangai leading the Big Ten in rushing, right? We did not know that Rutgers had the weapon that they ultimately had. My point to that is, how confident are you in the wide receiver group? Sometimes, when they say there's 6 or 7 options, do you have a legit number one option? But how I guess optimistic are you that this group can take a legitimate step forward this coming season and have some depth and talent and playmakers in that role?
I'm very bullish on the wide receivers. And, for your listeners that have heard me, I'm rarely like very extreme on the positive or negative, but I'm very high on the receivers. I thought Fama Toure played great. He had balls that he was catching that were out of bounds that didn't count, or maybe there were penalties. He was everywhere. And I don't think the coverage was bad. I thought that, Brantley definitely showed me enough that he did miss one pass that Gavin who threw that one in that was like a fastball. Somebody threw a laser to him. I think maybe it was Sarace, and like it went like through his hands. But for the most part, Brantley I thought was as advertised, better than I thought he would be. Duff, you're gonna have to play him. I mean, when you see what Ian Strong did last year, Corey Duff's better than that right now. I mean, I don't know if he's better than Ian Strong right now, but I know he's better than what Ian Strong was last year when he was basically one of your top 4 receivers. So I feel very confident that they'll be able to do it. And even like I said, Nasir Montgomery, even Dino Kaliakmanis, like if they had to be a sub in your 2 deep, I don't want to go in the season and say like these guys are in the 2 deep. But if there's injuries or stuff like that, and they have to be like your backup, one of your backup receivers, I think that's serviceable. Whereas in the past, they might have been like a top 4 or 5 receiver in the rotation. So I felt really good about it overall, because you really only need 3 guys in the field. Long didn't play. Miller didn't play, even though Miller looked like he would have loved to go in the game. Dremel didn't play. So I don't feel the receivers are going to hold this team back like they did in the past either. The only thing would be none of these guys, other than maybe Long and hopefully Miller, really bring you a lot of yards after the catch. I mean, people are going to comment, hey, what about Christian Dremel against Michigan? He beat one man and then 2 guys ran into each other. Like, he wasn't getting a lot of yards after the catch. And with Athan Kaliakmanis, he's going to throw the ball to guys in position that they can run after the catch. With Gavin Wimsatt, as long as they can secure the ball, because a lot of times it's inaccurate, but if they can secure the ball, like sometimes they're going to have space. And so I'm confident that this receiving group is going to make the plays they need to make. But the only thing I'm just not sure of is, are they going to be able to turn those, 15-yard gains into, a long touchdown run after the fact? Like, I'm not sure I don't know if that's there yet, but there's definitely a lot of talent. And then last thing I'll say about the receivers, which again, I really liked, is really what you want in your receiver group is you want guys who, when you say like weapon in the NFL, you want guys you can utilize in a number of different ways. Whereas in the past, we've kind of been locked in like, here's our X receiver, here's our wide receiver, here's our slot guy. Maybe Ben Black can just be a super speedster that we hope Rashad Rochelle would be in the past. Maybe Duff can be that hybrid tight end receiver guy that he can block enough that you can kind of use him in a different role. I'm hopeful that this allows the playbook to diversify in a sense of being able to run a more diversity of pass plays for them to attack a defense.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think you're right. You have certain guys that can have certain roles that you can implement into the offense that they haven't had before. And I think the depth piece is key as well. And then just touching on the pass offense, tight end, it wouldn't be a Scarlet Faithful podcast if I didn't mention Kenny Fletcher. I thought he looked really good at tight end, made a couple good catches. Mike Higgins, I flashed a little bit of potential that we've been hoping to see for a long time. Are you more confident that the tight ends will be competent this year and might even be featured as a little bit of a weapon in the pass game as well?
I feel like this is like my Derek Simpson take in basketball, where I was like higher than everyone else on him last year, and then this year I stayed the same, but everyone else was so much higher on him that they got disappointed. I feel like with the tight ends, I've been higher on most people up until this point, and now everyone saw some nice things in the spring game, and now they're even more. Whereas I'm trying to like stay even keeled. I thought that they did roughly what I expected. If I had to give a pecking order, I'd say Fletcher just looks like such a smooth athlete that it's going to be hard to keep him off the field if he's going to have to, especially in like a third and long situation when your tight end's going out to run a route. Like, he definitely showed that. But I do think that since he and Blake played for the white team and they had Kaliakmanis throwing to them, they just had more opportunities. I thought Logan Blake did okay. Whereas Victor Konopka, I don't even know if he had a catch. And Mike Higgins, he had one drop that was maybe not his fault. I was not. I'd say I was even on Higgins, where I was a little bit up more on Blake and Fletcher, and in the game. So overall, no, I don't think they're going to go get a tight end unless a really good one makes himself available.
Yeah, makes sense. And then just wrapping up, I did want to touch on the spring awards because I thought one thing that was telling, Kobe Asamoah won Most Improved Offensive Player, the Mark Mills Second Effort Award. So that's obviously encouraging. The line play defense, it's hard to have too many takeaways in the spring game, but I thought Asamoah winning Most Improved Offensive Player was certainly an encouraging sign. And also Al-Shadi Salam winning Most Improved Defensive Player at defensive back after making the shift from last fall. Was huge. No surprise, Timmy Ward winning the Frank Burns Award for toughness, perseverance. But any takeaways that you would glean from Asamoah and Salam?
I guess Asamoah was better. He clearly, you saw the difference when he came out of the game for the white team's protection. And he was going against Henry Hughes and Griffin, who were playing the interior line on red, who are legitimate Power 5 defensive linemen. But I guess I'm just still not sold on Asamoah's like mobility. It does concern me a little bit if he's your right guard. Obviously, he's got time. He's a big guy. He's got a few more months to continue to shape his body prior to the season. But it is good that we've talked about a guy from that recruiting class, that offensive line that had 7 guys, and we've talked about how they're kind of not performed where we'd hoped. I'm very pleased that at least the staff is starting to see development from one of them, and even if it's Asamoah, who's been kind of the front runner from that group all along. Obviously, I always want to see an offensive lineman improving, because if they're not, like, that's a major red flag. They should be getting better every year, so it's good to see that he won the award. For Salam at corner, I feel like the Rutgers defensive back coaching is just elite. I mean, the amount of guys who played in that game that like did a pretty good job was very, very impressive, and I was quite happy. I mean, like, Zylan Williams was playing on the other side of Salam, and I feel like the red DBs, like, were doing a pretty good, or I'm sorry, they were on the white team. They were doing a pretty good job of, even being in good spots when passes were caught. So I was quite happy about that. Salam, I think he got called from like a ticky-tack penalty, but like, they're going to need him there. Like, they're going to need his athleticism. Like, there's some other younger guys. I'm just not sure if they're totally ready for prime time. Like, he's going to have to play. So it's encouraging that cornerback, a position that the staff continues to play guys, it did well. And then Ward, obviously, great story. They did lose a lot of special teams contributors, especially on the punt block team, with losing Melton and Trevor Yaboa Cody. So they need solid guys at that position. So I'm glad that Ward won that award and will continue to be an anchor of that unit as we see some turnover this season.
Yeah, absolutely. And then last thing I wanted to touch on, Rutgers did get a commitment in the 2025 class. after the spring game this weekend, Stephen Murray, 3-star athlete out of North Carolina, can play cornerback or wide receiver. Big playmaker, known for his speed, 6'1", 160. Had some solid offers: Boston College, Syracuse, Temple, East Carolina, App State. Any thoughts on him in terms of watching his film and what it means for the 25 class?
I mean, his film's amazing. I didn't even know about this guy, even though he's in North Carolina, because some of the recruiting sources didn't have any grade on him. So, I mean, maybe I'll have to go up to Greensboro and see his senior season and see what's going on. He plays at Guilford. So
Yeah.
I was just, I wouldn't say blown away, but I was very impressed by his speed, his just athletic ability. He's fluid, just like we talked about with Ice Cup, who just recently committed. There's just a higher level athlete than we've seen been coming in on a regular basis. And so he just looks like a really, really fluid athlete, tracks the ball well on both sides of the ball. Like you saw a couple of his interceptions in his highlights where he really had to adjust, turn his head, and make a nice play. But I mean, it's hard to say on his competition. Um, Greensboro is a fairly big city, but a lot depends on exactly what conference you're in. So I have to look into that a little bit more. But this is the type of guy where I'm sure his offer list is going to pile up if teams care, because this guy really, he's just such a fluid athlete. He can add weight.
Yeah.
Maybe he'll get faster. I was just very impressed.
And I think also, in terms of one thing to think about, is Dave Brock. Let's just talk about him for a second. Wide receiver coach, what he's doing on the recruiting trail in terms of getting these guys out of North Carolina. You mentioned Crumpler before in the defensive end. I know he dropped that interception in the beginning, but he did make some good plays, encouraging there. Ben Black, a lot of buzz in the preseason. Obviously now adding Murray, who just looks like a big-time athlete. And then all the young receivers he has to work with. I just think, it's something to appreciate that Schiano has upgraded the coaching staff. He mentioned the defensive back coaches. He's prioritized the defensive line. I don't think it gets emphasized enough, the level of coaching that is in the program right now, and also the experience they have as recruiters and knowing how to identify talent. It just seems that they're operating at a much higher level as a staff right now.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about the North Carolina guys, I can't take any credit for this, but I guess the credit sounds like it should be going to Brock as well as Scott Vallone, who I think, Richie O'Leary was saying he basically built this pipeline from scratch, if I'm remembering what I heard right on their podcast. But I mean, Vallone, it must be in tandem, right? Because Brock, these guys are identifying, like we saw with Crumpler, as well as now these additional receivers. This upcoming class plus Black is their offer list is increasing rapidly, and it seems like the North Carolina schools are kind of being a little bit lazy. They're kind of getting into the game a little bit late. I think the word with Murray was that he didn't run particularly well, so North Carolina schools weren't recruiting him as much. But I mean, just watch his film. I'm of the belief that I don't think your 40-yard dash time matters that much for any position other than defensive back. Because if you're a defensive back, you have to be faster than the receiver, or you're gonna get smoked.
Yeah.
But for any other position, I don't really worry about it if a guy looks fast on tape. And so I'm very pleased with it. And yeah, credit to I think, again, like I said, I think it's Vallone and Brock together. But in terms of finding the players you can develop, convincing them to come with a good message, and then developing them. I mean, Fama Toure looks infinitely better than a year ago, no doubt. He looks way better. I mean, Nasir Montgomery, again, a walk-on who has gotten better every year. So to the point that now maybe you could have him and Dremel, both two walk-ons, catching passes. I mean, just what we did with Dremel, we haven't even talked about that enough. I mean, this is a guy who probably shouldn't even be in the Power 5 if it didn't come to his dedication, heart, and good coaching to get him over the top. I mean, I can't say enough positive things about the wide receiver coaching, and it's one of those things you don't really notice. It's kind of like a pitching coach in baseball. You don't notice unless you have a good one.
Very true. And last thought, Rutgers did add a punter from their pipeline in Australia. Pro Kick was trained with Adam Korsak, the GOAT. Pretty good last name too, Jacob Anderson, signing with Rutgers. And any thoughts on him?
Well, I don't think he's not related to me, and I don't know if he's related to Ryan Anderson, the Rutgers first team All
Great
Big
punter too.
punter pre-Corsac. People forget about that guy. He was first
Yep.
team All Big Ten,
Yep.
but he was just followed up by Corsac. So, I mean, I obviously I just feel much more comfortable with Australian rules football players because usually they're a little bit older and they're used to the contact, they're used to the pressure of kicking with guys running at them. So I feel pretty confident in that pipeline, but it's never a sure thing, especially with special teams. Like we didn't really see it in the spring game. You never know, but I have a pretty good feeling that Greg Schiano coach team, even if they don't have an official special teams coordinator, is going to be at least passable in special teams. The only question is, do they need to be elite in special teams to improve on their record? Because last year, several wins came with big special teams play, including the bowl game, including Michigan State game. You know, you gotta, if you want to win, like people are talking about 8, 9, 10 games, you got to be a dominating special teams unit when you're playing against teams that are equal to you on offense and defense.
Yep.
Because with the element of luck, a bounce here or there, you got to be in a position where that doesn't make you lose a ball game. And a lot of times those bounces on special teams mean a heck of a lot. So, I mean, I'm confident in the Australian rules football player, though I would have been I would have preferred to see him in the spring if we could have.
Yeah, great points as always, David Anderson. Thank you so much for being here. And apologies again on my voice, the allergies. Hopefully, I'll be even better tomorrow. And thanks so much for listening. Once again, exciting times for Rutgers football. We'll have plenty more throughout the offseason discussing this program ahead of 2024 fall season.